Okay, so if you're a data professional working anywhere near German financial institutions, I've got some news for you. There's a really good chance your model for counterparty risk is, well, it's fundamentally broken. And look, it's not your fault. It's because the whole German approach to risk is built on a logic that just shatters standard hierarchical data structures. So let's dive in and figure out how to get it right.
Here's what we're going to cover. First, we'll nail down what the real unit of risk is in the German system. Then we'll look at it through two totally different lenses, one based on control and one based on economics. After that, we'll see how those two views crash into each other, why that completely breaks your data model, and why the consequences are so high stakes. And finally, we'll tie it all back to why this matters for the stability of the entire financial system.
All right, first things first, we have to completely redefine our most basic assumption. When we're talking about risk, we can't just be looking at one single company. No way. The real unit of risk is always the group.
So let me ask you a simple question. When a bank makes a loan or signs a derivatives contract, who are they really exposed to? I'll tell you right now, the answer is a whole lot more complicated than just the name that's printed on the contract. You've got to think of it like this. The company you have that contract with, that's just the tiny, visible tip of the iceberg. The real danger, the bulk of the risk, is lurking right below the surface. It's a hidden, tangled web of ownership, of control, and deep financial interconnections. And that's what regulators need you to map out. To map this hidden risk, German and EU regulations give us two really powerful but very different lenses to look through. Let's start with the first one. This one is all about mapping out the formal lines of power.
This is what's called Die Gruppe Verbundene Kunden, or GvK for short. Now, this concept comes from the EU-wide Capital Requirements Regulation, the CRR, and it defines a risk group based purely on control. Think parent companies and their subsidiaries, all linked together by voting rights and formal ownership. It's basically your classic corporate family tree.
And the key thing to notice here is just how clean this structure is. In a GvK, Company A controls B, C, and D. They form a single, neat, hierarchical group. If you're a data modeler, this looks totally familiar, right? Super easy. You probably just use a simple parent ID to link them all together. But hold that thought.
Because now we're going to apply our second lens. And this is where things start to get really complicated. This lens has nothing to do with control. It's all about contagion. Welcome to the Kreditnehmereinheit, or KNE. This is a very specific German concept that comes from their large exposure regulation, die GvK. A KNE group isn't defined by who owns who. Nope, it's all about economic dependency. The one question you have to ask is this. If one company gets into deep financial trouble, is it likely that another company will suddenly struggle to repay its debts? If the answer is yes, boom, they form a KNE. So you see, we have these two parallel universes for risk. GvK, which comes from the CRR, is this top-down, formal, control-based view, but KNE, from the GvK, is a bottom-up view based on how money and economic pain actually flow in the real world. They are not the same thing, and they definitely don't always overlap. And this right here is where those two universes collide, creating an absolute nightmare for anyone trying to model this reality in a traditional database. Okay, for all my fellow data architects out there, here's the punchline. That simple parent_ID field you love, it's completely broken. It's useless here. Why? Because under these rules, a single company can belong to its GvK control group and a totally different KNE economic group at the exact same time. And this visual just shows the problem perfectly. Look on the left. That's the GvK view. Company A controls its subsidiaries, A1 and A2. That's one risk group. Simple, clean. But now look at the right. Company B1 is economically dependent on A2. Maybe it's a critical supplier. So if A2 goes down, B1 is in huge trouble. That means B1 forms a KNE risk group with its parent, B. Now look closely. Company A2 is now a part of two completely different risk stories, connecting the A group and the B group in a way a simple hierarchy could never, ever capture. So what's the solution? Well, you have to completely abandon the idea of a simple tree structure. The reality of German risk isn't a tree, it's a network, it's a graph. Your data model has to be able to handle these messy, many-to-many relationships, where one company is a node that can be connected to multiple overlapping risk groups. So why on earth is it so critical to get this right? I mean, why all this hassle? Because this is not just some academic data modeling exercise. The financial consequences of getting this wrong are absolutely massive. First, let's talk about the upside. If you can correctly identify these groups, you can apply what are called master netting agreements, or Rahmenverträge in German. Think of standard contracts like an ISDA or a DRV. What these do is let a bank net its exposures. So if you owe a group 100 million, but they owe you 80 million, your net risk is only 20 million. Getting this right can free up enormous amounts of capital, but only if your grouping is correct.
But there's also a really big downside to getting it wrong. And it all comes down to one single number, 25%.
This is the large exposure limit. A bank's total exposure to a single control group, a single GvK, cannot go over 25% of its core Tier 1 capital, period. If you miscalculate the group, you could accidentally blow right past this hard limit, and that is considered an exceptional failure. We're talking about immediate, red alert reporting to regulators like the BaFin and the Bundesbank. The stakes just could not be higher.
So why all this complexity? Why create a system that challenges our data models in such a profound way? Well, it's because it's a lesson that was learned the hard way, from financial crises.
This quote here, from the Senior Supervisors Group, it was written right after the 2008 crisis, and it says everything. The biggest failures happened when the boards and senior managers just couldn't see the real risks their companies were taking. They saw that little tip of the iceberg, but they were completely blind to the huge interconnected risks that were hidden just below the surface.
So at the end of the day, this dual logic of GvK and KNE, it's not just more bureaucracy. It's actually a pretty sophisticated framework designed to force banks to look beneath the surface. It forces them to map out those hidden channels of financial contagion before a crisis hits. And that makes the entire financial system just a little bit safer.
Getting this right means your data model can finally start to reflect reality, which is a huge win. But it does leave us with one last, pretty challenging thought. This whole framework helps us map the risks and dependencies we can identify today. But the real question is, what new unseen connections are forming right now that will define the next systemic shock?